Hello, this is the fourth in a series about Mennonite history, Russian Honeymoon and Winds of Change. It's a talk by me, Elma Schemenauer. I'm an author, written a number of books. I was born Elma Mary Martins into a Mennonite family and grew up in a Mennonite community, especially in my earlier years. So I call myself Elma Mary from the Prairie, and there is my website if you ever want to have a look at some of the books I've written, or you can just look for Elma Mary from the Prairie or Elma Schemenauer. In 1786, Empress Catherine the Great of Russia gained a new area, South Russia. Today it's the Ukraine, but at that time it was called South Russia. It had very good land, and some of its fertile plains had few settled inhabitants and almost no farms. Catherine wanted to develop it. She offered free land to German-speaking settlers who would be willing to move to South Russia. These would include Lutherans, German-speaking Lutherans, German-speaking Catholics, German-speaking Mennonites, and other groups. So it was an attractive offer. She offered control of their own churches, schools, and local government. Also, freedom from military conscription. They wouldn't have to go into the army. Now, this sounded like a very, very good thing to Mennonites. It was like a honeymoon, almost a proposal, a marriage proposal, and a promise of a honeymoon to go to something that nice. They had had some troubles in the past. They'd been persecuted, started in Switzerland, as you know, and then they the Mennonite ideas grew in the Low Countries here in Belgium, Netherlands, and northern Germany, and then a lot of the Mennonites, because of persecution, moved to Polish Prussia. Now they had the opportunity to move somewhere else. Some of them were very, very interested in that. They had the opportunity to go from there to South Russia, which is marked with the blue arrow there. And you can see it's quite a long way. It's farther than what they had gone before to go into Polish Prussia. Catherine had a very good opinion of the Mennonites. She expected great things from them. She saw them as restorers and stewards of the earth because of all the work they had done previously in draining swampland and reclaiming land from it. And so she, I don't think the word environmentalist was used in those days, but in our day, we would probably call them environmentalists. In 1788, a few Danzig area Mennonites left for South Russia. They traveled in farm wagons loaded with furniture and other goods. If you are the kind who likes to remember dates, this might be one to remember. In 1789, Mennonites established their first colony in South Russia. It was called Hortitsa, and it was on the Dnieper River. And I grew up hearing about the Dnieper River. It was almost legendary amongst Mennonites, especially those who had come from Russia, because it was such a beautiful river in their opinion, and it was such an important river in their area. In 1804, Mennonites established their second colony in South Russia, and it was called Malachna. It was southeast of Hortitsa on the Malachnaya River. Many of the settlers started with sheep and other livestock. Then they grew crops, wheat and other crops. The land was very rich and easily cultivated. They didn't have to reclaim it from the sea. All they had to do is plow it. There were very few trees. They didn't have to clear away trees. These are zwieback. I grew up with these. My parents and my other relatives made these. What you would do, you make a bun, and then you make another one and set it on top, a somewhat smaller one, and set it on top, and then you bake that. When you want to eat it, you lift the top one off, and you put some butter or sausage and jam, whatever you want, inside, and then you put the top one back on and eat that. And that's very good. It's like it's sort of a ready-made sandwich. Or if you were a little more delicate about the way you ate, you could eat each piece separately. Then you get more of the filling. The Mennonites introduced potatoes to the area. They hadn't been grown there, or at least not to any large extent. So they were the ones who brought in potatoes. They also planted trees. As I said, there were not very many trees, and so they planted all kinds of trees, including mulberry trees, to produce silk. Not in every area where they lived, because the climate wasn't suitable in every area, but in some areas they did produce silk. Here's a typical layout of a Mennonite farm in South Russia. Here you can see the garden, and there's different buildings it would be a house, barn, and other outbuildings. Mennonites were wary of mixing with the Russians, whose beliefs, culture, and language were very unfamiliar to them. Mennonites had lived among Reformed people before, members of the Reformed Church, and they had lived among Catholics and Lutherans, but they had never lived among Russian Orthodox people, and this was all very new to them. And of course, the Russian language was not familiar to them. So they didn't mix with the Russians, and also the government strongly discouraged the two groups from mixing. They didn't want the Russian people to become Mennonites. They just wanted the Mennonites to live there and to farm and contribute to the economy, but not to intermarry or mix with the Russian people. The first two colonies mentioned Horjica and the Malachna. As time went on, they became too crowded. There were more and more people, and so they established daughter colonies. These were the ones they had before 1865. There's Bergthal, Borozenko, Furstenland, and Crimea down in the south, here near the Black Sea. As I said, the Russian government gave Mennonites certain benefits, and very significant benefits, but it gave these benefits only to church members. You couldn't claim them if you simply had a Mennonite sounding name, or if your ancestors had been Mennonites. No, you had to be a member yourself. And this more or less required all Mennonite youth to join the church. And the way you did that was by baptism. Sometimes done by pouring or sprinkling, and here we see a container that would have been used for the water. Church membership through baptism was also required for marriage. You couldn't get married unless you had been baptized. You'll see that in records. If you look at the old records of some of those people in those days, they will often be baptized at the ages of something like in the late teens or in their early 20s, they would be baptized, and then often the baptism is followed by the marriage. Now, tying the baptism to government benefits and marriage muddied the idea of baptism only for believers. That was one of their very strong points of the Mennonite movement, was that only believers, sola fide, faith alone, and because you had to have faith in order to become a Christian, be a member of the church, and so this kind of got blurry, because here somebody could just go through the form of it for the sake of the benefits and for the sake of getting married, and they didn't necessarily need to believe. I guess a lot of them did believe, but some of them, I guess, just did it because it was the thing to do. In the 1860s, a religious awakening occurred among Russian Mennonites. It led to the establishment of what was called the Mennonite Brethren Church, which insisted on baptism by immersion. And here we see some Mennonites in a settlement called Orenburg. Yeah, I guess it was Orenburg. Later, Orenburg was established later, but it is a representative of Mennonites who believed in baptism by immersion only. So this would be near a river or a lake where they would be baptized. Mennonite Brethren were strong on separation from worldliness too. They didn't want people to do things like dancing, smoking, drinking, gambling, theater going. This was all frowned upon. Something similar was going on in North America in 1872 and after. Old Order Mennonite groups were established there. And they arose from conflicts over modern innovations. Mennonites there were wary of becoming too modern, being influenced too much by those around them. And they didn't want Sunday school. This seems a little puzzling. They didn't like the idea of Sunday school, I guess because those around them had Sunday school and they thought that this was just too modern. And another big reason was that they thought, well, parents should be teaching their children the faith at home. There shouldn't be a need for Sunday school. They also didn't like revival meetings. I guess they thought they were too emotional. They didn't like English being used in church. And they didn't, some of them didn't want to have cars or other vehicles like that. They wanted motorized vehicles. They thought that they should stick with horses and buggies the way they had been in the past. So you'll find Old Order Mennonite groups written about, and they certainly exist still today, and Old Order Mennonite groups are often written about in novels and stories and so forth. They are interesting because they look different, they have a different lifestyle and different values, different principles, and people are interested in them. Okay, I'll see you in the next episode of this YouTube series. It's called Mennonite History 5, An Uneasy Golden Age. Okay, while you're still here, here's one of the books I've written called Consider the Sunflowers. It's a novel, 299 pages, takes place in the 1940s on the prairies, and includes a Mennonite timeline in the back. It's about family and love and community relationships and the church, Mennonite Church, and so forth. Here it's available online for $20 from the publisher, Borealis Press of Ottawa, or Chapters Indigo online or Amazon. Thank you for listening.